Hello children. Today I'll be taking poem A Legend of the Northland by Phoebe Carey. Class 9th. Phoebe Carey, before getting into the poem and looking into various aspects of poem and what the poetess wants to say through this poem, let's get or take a look into the life of the poet herself. Phoebe Carey, she was born on September 4, 1824 and died in 1871. She was an American poetess and her younger sister's name was Alice Carey. These sisters, both these sisters, they co-published poems and went on to publish their own volumes. And Phoebe Carey, she didn't went to school, and because she has to do her household chores, so she was basically self-educated. She died of hepatitis and was buried in New York. So this was about the poetess Phoebe Carey. Her poem, A Legend of Northland. Now, before getting into the poem, let's talk about what legend is. Children, legend is basically an old story that may or may not be true. Now, A Legend of the Northland, this poem falls under the category or genre of ballad. What ballad is? A ballad is a song narrating a story in short stanzas. Ballads are a part of folk culture or popular culture and are passed on orally from one generation to the next. A Legend of the Northland is a ballad. Let's take an example of ballad apart from A Legend of the Northland. Rhyme of Ancient Mariner. It's an example of ballad written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Okay, so this ballad, A Legend of Northland, which is also a legend. Here, the poetess is narrating a legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed, and she was punished and was transformed into a bird, a woodpecker. Let's begin with the story. Children, before getting into the poem, while I was dealing with ballad, a few words came: folk culture and popular culture. Folk culture is basically the traditional songs, traditional stories, or that belongs to a particular culture or tradition. Okay, suppose people of Gujarat or a particular tribe, they will have their own folk culture, their own folk dances, folk stories, जिसको हम लोक कथाएं कहते हैं. ठीक है? Popular culture means all the things that is related to present day media, your film, your cinema, your web series, your serials, your dramas, your everything that is being portrayed through this television and then magazines and all these comes under the category of popular culture. Popular culture, because it is being catered, it is being looked on by million and masses. Okay, so that's why it is very much popular among the masses, among the million, among the people. So it is known as popular culture. Okay, Now let's get into the poem. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. In the very first stanza, the poetess is telling us about the place. She's describing the place Northland. She's saying, away, away. It means this place Northland is quite far away. It's quite far away, somewhere at the corner of the globe, where the hours of the day are few. Means days are shorter. And the nights are so long in winter. And nights are pretty long in winter. In Northland, majority of time it's winter. Only a few months there is sunshine. Rest every time it's dark and cold. That they cannot sleep them through. And the winters, these nights, these are so long that it's not possible to sleep throughout. Okay, it's very tiring. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bear's cubs in their funny furry clothes. Now he is talking about the livelihood and how they look, their appearance and their livelihood is being talked in the second stanza. Poetess is saying, I'm talking about that place, that Northland, where the people, they domesticate reindeers, okay, to so that they can pull sledges when it's snow. It means that they use reindeer to pull sledges, and these sledges help them to for transportation, for traveling and all, because it can easily slip on the snow. And the children look like bear's cubs. Children are being, simile is being used here, that the children are being compared to bear's cubs. Okay, so simile is being used here. And the children look like bear's cubs in their funny furry clothes. And why do they look like bear's cubs? Because they are wearing heavy furry clothes to protect themselves from cold. And so they look very funny, like bears, as they are totally covered from head to toe with furry woolen clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Now, the poet is saying that in that very Northland, a very famous a very old legend or a story is very famous, which they tell to their children, and it is being passed on from generation to generation. The poetess says, I don't believe on all that stories. I don't take it as a true. And yet you may learn a lesson, since it's not true. But still you will learn a lesson from it. If I tell the tale to you, if she tells and she says that you will learn a lesson, though it is not true. But when I will tell you that tale, that story, you will learn a lesson from it. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below. Now, the first character in this poem is Saint Peter. Saint Peter was among the that holy lot of Christ. Okay. So he was also among those holy circles. And it is being talked about that time when Saint Peter was living in the world below. He came on this earth to preach the goodness of Christianity. He was preaching goodness to people and walked about it, preaching, just as he did, And throughout the country, he used to walk and preach good teachings of Christianity. Okay. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth. And one day, while he was traveling around, while he was giving sermons, preaching to other people, one day he went or came near a door of a cottage where a little woman was making cakes. And he came to that place where a woman was making cakes and baking them on the earth. She was making cakes and she was baking it in the earth. And being faint with fasting, since he was traveling all around and he was preaching hard to the people, so he was totally exhausted. And when he came to that woman's door, he was totally exhausted and he was to faint because of fasting. For the day was almost done. For the day was almost done means it's evening. It's going to be dark. He asked her from her store of cakes. And he asked to lend her a cake, a piece of cake, to give him a single one. That she was having a store of cakes. She was running a shop. And he asked that please give me a cake because he was very hungry. So she made a very little cake. And then she prepared a dough and she made a very small cake, very little cake. But as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Now, when she baked the cake appeared to be very large to her. And she said that no, this much big cake, it's not possible to give it to a beggar or someone else. She became very greedy. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one. But it looked when she turned it over a large as the first had done. Now, she needed another dough and she took a very small dough, a very small, much smaller than the previous one. And she prepared it, and when it was baked, it appeared to be bigger, larger than the first one. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough. Then again, she took a tiny scrap. Okay, a very little one. And rolled it flat. And she rolled continuously. She was rolling it until it became totally flat, like a chips. And baked it thin as a wafer. And it was so flat, so thin like a wafer, like a chips. But she couldn't part with that. But her greediness was so strong within her that she refused to part from that wafer also. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself. She's talking to herself, that when I eat these cakes, it appears very small to me. And why it is appearing so large when I have to give this to that man? It's her greediness which is speaking. It's her selfishness which is speaking. Are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. And she said that no, it's still bigger one. I'm not going to give it. And she keeps those cakes on the shelf. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint. And surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Now, Saint Peter, the good Saint Peter, now he was getting very angry because he could not believe that how could a person on this earth, and that to a woman, be so selfish. How can she behave in this way? Because women are supposed to be taken as mothers. They have to feed their children. They are very generous. And how could this woman be so selfish? This angered Saint Peter a lot, that I'm preaching so much of good on this earth. I'm dying of, I'm just dying of hunger, all. I'm exhausting myself by preaching, and see what type of human beings are there on this earth. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. Now this man, Saint Peter, he got angry and he said, you are too selfish to stay on this earth and have a human form. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve to have both food and shelter and the fire to keep you warm. You don't deserve all the goodness, all the facilities which human beings are provided with, or they have it. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard, dry wood. Now he curses this lady and says that now you build as the birds do. Now you have to go and build, or you have to live the hard life which these birds have to live, and shall get your scanty food. You have to live a life of a bird, and you will get only that much of scanty food by boring and boring and boring. And you have to bore deep hole you have to create. You have to just bore. You have to do a lot of struggle to get a scanty bit of food to keep yourself alive. And you have to work all day hard in that hard, dry wood. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word. And out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Now, after the curse, then up she went through the chimney. She was transformed into a bird. So she flew away outside through the chimney. And she could not speak a single human word. Why? Because she was now transformed into a bird, and birds don't speak like human beings. And out of the top flew a woodpecker. And who flew out of the chimney? Which bird? It was a woodpecker. For she was changed to a bird. And this old lady, she was changed into a bird. And into which bird? Into a woodpecker. And had a scarlet cap on her head, scarlet, red color. And that was left the same. But all the rest of her clothes were burned, black as a coal in the flame. She was carrying with her only her red scarf, which we see till date on the head of a woodpecker. Woodpecker on its body carries a red color mark. Okay, and that is the only sign that a woman was wearing when she was in human form. And that was left the same. And that only that red scarf was left the same. Okay. But all the rest of her clothes were burned. And all her clothes were burned into a black as coal in the flame. The clothes which she was wearing, it was all burned in the flame. Okay. All her human clothings were burnt, and now she's like a black. Okay, her body, woodpecker's body, totally, it's black. Only that red color cap is being seen there on its top, on its head, hood. And every country schoolboy has seen in her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. And till date, you can see every country children, every schoolboy has seen that woodpecker in the woods, who still date, she is struggling to attain her scanty bit of food by boring and boring deep into the woods. So children so the basic theme of this, the central idea of the poem is that we should not be selfish and always help the needy. A selfish person has no satisfaction in life. Okay, so with this, we come to an end of this poem. And before ending this poem, I would like to summarize it once more. That the poem is speaking about Northland, which is a cold region. Here, the nights are longer as compared to days in winters. So once Saint Peter, he stopped at an old lady's cottage because he was feeling very hungry. The lady was baking cakes on the hearth when Saint Peter asked for one of the cakes. She tried to make a tiny cake for him, but when she baked it, she found it too large to give it to him. She tried to bake 2 more times, but even the smallest of the cakes seemed too large to her. Such greedy behavior of the lady annoyed the hungry saint. He cursed her, saying that she was far too selfish to be a human being, to have food, shelter, and fire to keep her warm. Thus, she was transformed into a woodpecker. All her clothes except her scarlet cap were gone as she went up the chimney and flew out of the top. Only that scarlet cap was there, or still did woodpeckers. You can see that the woodpeckers, they have this scarlet cap sort of on their hood. Every schoolboy is said to have seen her in the forest, boring into the wood for food. So, with this, we come to an end of this poem. Thank you.